Hello, and welcome to this talk in the ALAC speaker series. ALAC stands for the Association for Informal Logic and Critical Thinking, and I am Donna Warren, Vice President of ALAC. And I am delighted today to welcome you all to listen to Professor Simon Cullen, who is talking about something that I think is particularly relevant today, but is evergreen, rational scaffolding, how argument visualization and AI can help us reason more effectively and communicate more openly about polarizing topics. So, Simon, take it away.
Thank you, Donna. Well, it's a real pleasure to be invited here and a real pleasure to talk to you all today. I do have a lot that I want to get through, but let me just quickly see, Donna, can we do a poll to see how many people watched the watch the little demo that I shared? Okay, while you do that, I am going to get this share going. All right. So without any, okay, there we go. All right, so with any luck, everyone can now see my screen nice and clear. Okay, beautiful. Well, in 2021, I launched a new class at Carnegie Mellon called Dangerous Ideas in Science and Society. And within just 2 years, it was among the most highly demanded courses at CMU. So in the most recent iteration of the course, I raised the enrollment to 200 students, yet the wait list was still filled with hundreds of students, I think around 400 or 500 students in the end. I think this tells us something really important about students and about the state of free expression on campus. So I want to try and tell you about the class and especially about the teaching methods that make it possible and the role that I think reasoning pedagogy plays in it. And I guess I want to say, I can turn my share off so I can see you. It seems like I have a choice between either seeing you or seeing my slide. But yeah, I think, you know, in this post-election period, no matter what side of that debate you're on, there are a lot of arguments, a lot of important arguments that a lot of people feel really strongly about. And I suspect a lot of people will agree that starting to have those discussions between those of us who don't agree may be more important than it's ever been before. So I really want to encourage everyone who works on informal reasoning to think about the role that informal reasoning pedagogy might play in things like helping students to reason more clearly about politically taboo or controversial topics, but also just regular folks. So I'm going to use some student quotes for this purpose, and to avoid reading them to you, I've had some AI voice actors do that. So there'll be a little icon in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen whenever I have a quote, which will either show a mask if it's from anonymous survey data, or it will show the sun reflecting on the ocean if it's from a student course reflection. So let's begin with the very first lecture of the class. So the question is, what's the point of a liberal arts education? And the standard answer, the answer that many colleges and universities, and perhaps many of us have settled on, is that the point is to teach students how to think. You're going to learn how to learn, we tell them, and that sounds really deep. In fact, it might be the only thing faculty across all disciplines agree on, is that it is essential or very important to develop the ability to think critically in college. And indeed, there is a ton of room for improvement. Here are some data from a study that I ran at Princeton University. Now you can see there are 25 questions on that test. Each question has 5 response alternatives. So that means just guessing randomly, you're going to get 5 out of 25. And you can see here that given 35 minutes, a substantial fraction of the chimps are failing to beat Princeton University students by more than, say, 10 points. And the situation is actually even worse at Rutgers University, where I find this bump here where the chimps are beating the students. So definitely room to improve students' reasoning skills. But the question is, are we budging the needle? So some data that I've collected on this at CMU would contribute to pretty much any time anyone has looked at the question, they found the same answer. So here we see the logical reasoning test scores of freshmen, 13.5. There's a little bit cut off there, but it's about 12.5 or 12.6. Then we get a little bump up to 14. But we are back down to 13.5 by the end of the senior year. So over 4 years at Carnegie Mellon University, I can find no evidence of learning of these sorts of topic neutral reasoning skills, the sort that are tested in the LSAT logical reasoning test, which I think is one of the most beautiful psychometric instruments for this purpose. Now, some people object. They say, oh, well, they're getting senioritis. So as they get further on, they start trying harder. Well, we can just filter out everyone who didn't use the full 35 minutes and didn't say they tried their best. When you do that, all of the scores go up a bit. But as you can see, still no evidence of learning over 4 years, around $250,000 for that degree. So, you know, even if this critical thinking line of argument for what we do, for the value of what we do, doesn't work, well, at least students are exposed to a range of viewpoints. At least they get to look around them and transcend the accidents of their births. Well, unfortunately, intolerant censorious campus cultures have led to very alarming levels of conformism and self-censorship. So I want to show you some comments from an anonymous pre-semester survey. So here you go. This is when I ask students about if they have any past with self-censorship.
At school, I knew that I shouldn't ever try to talk about controversial topics.
When my parents sent me to CMU, they told me to stay silent about controversial topics.
I don't support certain liberal ideologies, but I cannot and will not ever let anyone except for my closest friends know that.
So many students, no matter their political leanings, have concluded that the potential benefits of discussing controversial topics in class or with us, their professors, are far outweighed by the potential academic and social risks. And sadly, very few students actually report having found spaces outside of their classes where they can openly discuss these sorts of important controversial topics. Instead, they are much more likely to report experiences like this student.
When I was talking to my boyfriend about affirmative action and racism, I stated a different view just to play with the idea and try to understand it. He attacked me and said he couldn't even respond or try to explain it to me without being super upset.
To which I say, dump him. She needs an intellectual peer. But this, unfortunately, seems to be a fairly widespread experience. So here we look at some numerical data where I survey students about how comfortable they feel expressing their opinions about a controversial subject. Now, these questions are adapted from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression National Survey, which is well worth looking at. So let's start with the baseline. No surprises there. On social media, students are not comfortable talking about controversial topics. But what about in classroom discussions? Actually, it's only marginally better. Only 10% report being comfortable in class. But hey, look, at least they can talk when they're not in class, right? Actually, it appears not really, since over half of them are somewhat or very uncomfortable in common campus spaces, like dining halls and dorm rooms. The result that's saddest to me when even talking to their professors, us, right? Their teachers, they don't feel comfortable exploring controversial views. And only 1 in 5 students report feeling comfortable when they know that we can punish them with grades. So results like these seem to reveal a very deep pedagogical problem. And often when I'm talking about this subject to people, I'll now have a big argument which draws on the absolute banger of chapter 2 on liberty, on the liberty of thought and discussion. But I feel like with this audience, I might not need to argue for that particular claim, although I'd be pleased to. But the basic thought is, look, if students can't defend their own views, if they're not even aware of the objections that have been made to their own views, then in a deep sense, they don't actually understand the positions that they profess, even if they have an extraordinary degree of moral certainty. And actually, students' responses to other questions that I ask them suggest that many of them actually appreciate this fact about the importance of engaging with opposing views. For example, a majority of them agree or somewhat agree strongly that all students should be allowed to defend their sincere beliefs, even if some will be offended. And when they're asked to consider a course that tackles moral, political, or social issues, almost all students say that learning when you're wrong is more valuable than learning when you're right, that they learn best when their beliefs are challenged rather than affirmed, and that they would prefer to take a course that examines the best arguments opposing their beliefs rather than supporting them. I have tried to answer that call with my course, Dangerous Ideas. So the course is fast-paced and it addresses arguments on multiple sides of a lot of different questions, including the campus speech culture itself, the relationship, if any, between social media and mental illness, human genetic enhancement. We discuss abortion, but we also discuss infanticide. We talk about euthanasia. We talk about transracialism, or people who identify with a race other than the one assigned at birth. We talk about our obligations to non-human animals, whether neuroscience has proven that free will is an illusion. We discuss gun rights, and we even discuss the existence of God and the problem of evil, just to take a handful of examples. So I chose these topics not because I'm just desperate to teach about them. In fact, I have had to take a lot of things I love off the syllabus to get this stuff into my class. But the reason I do it is because when I ask them, why are you taking my class? Most of them say things like this.
To discuss ideas that weren't allowed in high school.
To learn not only more about my own beliefs, but also about beliefs that oppose mine.
To accept when I'm wrong and not take it too personally.
To improve my skills communicating with people who disagree with me.
To examine and flesh out my own views and arguments, because presently I really am not sure exactly where I stand on most ethical issues.
So by the end of the semester, many students have come to recognize that they in fact held these passionate moral views on topics about which they were almost totally ignorant. And it's, as much as I think everyone kind of knows that, it's still quite shocking to see them say it. So I'll share another few quotes.
I would typically just take a stand for the side that is most popular among the people I know without even knowing the reasoning behind it.
I was surprised to find myself stumped on providing supportive evidence for my strongly held opinions.
I didn't even think it was important to spend time understanding the other side when I was so certain that my beliefs must be the truth.
Because so few students have considered arguments on both sides of the controversial issues addressed in my class, their attitudes turn out to be quite malleable, and they can flip within just a 50-minute lecture. So I poll students anonymously at the beginning of every topic and then again at the end to measure their attitudes and their confidence and how those things change. And although very few students have thought deeply about these topics before taking the class, it does not stop them from having very confident opinions. So for example, at the beginning of the course's discussion of arguments concerning abortion, I asked them to say how confident they feel in their views. So as you can see, we start off with over half the class saying they feel very or extremely confident, and under 15% saying they're not at all or only somewhat confident. Now, in this lecture, I'm not trying to argue for one side or the other. As always, I'm very careful to make sure they have no idea what my personal beliefs are. I just begin to sketch the arguments on both sides of the debate, arguments that the class will go on to explore and critique for a couple of weeks. Well, a 50-minute lecture is all it takes to really open students' minds before they go off into their discussion sections. At the end of lecture, around 40% of students say they are not at all or only somewhat confident, which is a 2.5-fold increase in 50 minutes. So one of the more controversial lectures is an argument for transracialism. If that word isn't familiar to you, think about figures like Rachel Dolezal. So as you can see, at the beginning of the lecture, under 10% of students believe it was possible for a person to transition away from their race assigned at birth, whatever you like to call it. But after my lecture, where students are just introduced to a cast of transracial characters and to philosophical arguments like Rebecca Tuval's, around 1 in 3 students agree that it's possible to transition between races. And I'll give you just one last example. Before I give a lecture on pro-gun rights arguments, which is what I do before I do the anti-gun rights, around 40% of students strongly support banning civilian gun ownership. But after just 50 minutes of reviewing data and listening to some arguments, less than 10% of students strongly support banning guns. So for many students, these lectures, and especially those which feature guest speakers, can have a really profound impact on their confidence in their own views, which can make them respond to argumentation in quite a different way when it comes time for the problem set session, which I'll talk about in a moment, or the recitation where they discuss the topic with other students. To give you one example, I invite Professor Sharif Gurgis, a pro-life philosopher and conservative legal scholar, to discuss abortion in the course's final lecture on that topic. And I want to share with you a student reflecting on what that meeting meant to her.
As a strong liberal, I have always disregarded pro-life people as a bunch of misogynists who want to oppress women. But after that lecture, I realized that there is so much more behind the pro-life versus pro-choice slogan. Although listening to the guest speaker did not change my viewpoint, it made me reflect much deeper on what I actually support and believe in. At the end of the day, I came out as a more rational and morally consistent person who has a much deeper understanding about my pro-choice belief and how to defend my position. I have also come to the realization that maybe pro-life people are not the evil misogynists that I believe them to be, and I am more willing to sit down and listen to their point of view.
Okay. So cultivating experiences like this in lectures is a great way, like I mentioned, to prepare them to have more open-minded conversations in the discussion sections at the end of the week. So here is the student talking about a discussion that he had in the section after the lecture that that student was just talking about.
The best topic we covered in this class was definitely abortion. I'm a right-winged guy and have never been too fond of the idea of killing a baby. In section that week, I was in a group with 3 girls debating about abortion. You can probably figure out on your own that my group wasn't the fondest of my viewpoint. Not only did this teach me the opposite side of the argument, but it taught me how to be respectful to others. I think that week wraps this whole class up for me. Not only did this class teach me how to argue, it taught me how to be conscious of others and not to have the biggest ego when it comes to debating.
So what does a semester of this do to students measurably? So let me show you the same data, the same questions that I was looking at earlier from the pre-semester survey when students were asked about their experience with self-censorship. And you see only 8 to 19% reported feeling comfortable across these 3 course contexts. So now when I anonymously survey them at the end of the semester, specifically about their experiences in my class, well, here now we see something really different. The fraction of students who feel comfortable teaching to the talking staff has nearly quadrupled, and classroom discussions are transformed. The fraction of students who are comfortable goes from under 30 at the beginning to 85 at the end. And students get the message that we really do welcome all perspectives if they are argued for. Under 5% of students are worried about being punished for their views with course grades. And I also find that students begin to think quite differently about encountering ideas that they might find offensive on campus. So at the beginning of the semester, 60% say it's important they're not exposed to such ideas. By the end, that number has been cut in half. And they managed to do all of this while maintaining an extraordinarily high level of respect. One of the things I love most about this is seeing the way students bring it to their daily lives and out of the classroom. So I know I've had quite a few quotes, but these will be among the last.
When I went to recitation, I couldn't believe that I could share my viewpoints without being shunned or hated.
This has been most likely the only class that I've taken at CMU that has changed the way that I will go about my life now that it's over.
So now we're at the end of the course. One thing I'm reflecting on is how much I've changed as a person and how much more open-minded and prepared for productive discussions I am.
Despite the little influence this course holds on the majority of my studies, it proved to be the most influential for my day-to-day life.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to transition a little to how all of this works. How is this possible? What do we do? But if there are any clarificatory questions, I could answer those quickly now. Let me just get the chat so that I can see any comes through. Okay. Oh, okay. It doesn't look like there's anything there. All right. So I'm going to push on, but I'll pause again to see if there are questions. So many of you will know that this technique, argument visualization or argument mapping or argument diagramming, has found support in several small studies of different methodological soundness. So this is from my contribution to that literature. This was data collected at Princeton. So I'm going to show it to you like this. A dot at 4 would mean a student who improved by at least 4 points between the beginning and the end of their first semester at Princeton. And -2 would show a student who got worse by 2 points. Now, here's what we see in the control group, students who wanted to take part in the intervention but couldn't. You can see there some students are indeed getting better, but some are getting worse, and overall it's nearly a wash. So what about the students who got this very intensive training in argument visualization? Well, there we see a really different picture. There we see something like 0.7 standard deviation improvement above what we measure in the control group, which is quite meaningful to give you a sense of that in context, it would be the difference between a top 10 law school and a top 40 law school on the LSAT. So we published our results in Nature Science of Learning. And this is actually a point where I think Donna, is it safe for me to assume everyone here totally knows what argument visualization is?
Not completely, no.
Okay, I'm gonna go through this kind of fast then. So what is this amazing technique? Well, imagine Donna says to me, hey, Simon, soccer is so much better than baseball. Well, of course, we can represent that. That's a conclusion that she might argue for. And naturally, I'm going to demand a reason. What? You got to be joking. Why do you think that? And so now you can see the first representational convention here, a green bracket showing that this is support, something that aims to raise your confidence. So Donna might say, well, one great thing about it is that it requires tremendous athleticism of its players. We strip all of that away, get right down to soccer requires athleticism. And Donna could continue. After all, you can't run up and down a football pitch for 90 minutes. So these things can build recursively. We can provide support for claims that play a role of supporting. Now, one of the most important things we teach students when learning this technique is to sort of develop their ear for assumptions, for implicit claims. They're needed to make the argument fly, but often where the problems are hiding. So in this case, it's a toy example. It's very simple, obviously. The implicit claim is running up and down a football pitch for 90 minutes requires athleticism. And here I've used a dashed border as a convention to represent an assumption, something that was kind of ghostly in the background or something. I don't know. Okay, so, yeah, but I don't know, what are you telling about? Baseball requires athleticism too. You try stealing second base. So at this point, we have to see Donna is actually objecting to an unstated claim, which I've failed to put in dotted lines. That should be in dotted lines. This is a mistake. And indeed, Donna will additionally supply an argument. You try stealing second base. Okay, so again, there's an assumption here, which we need to make explicit. And again, it's a pretty simple one. Stealing second base requires athleticism. Okay, so we can go through this. The last bit of it is actually somewhat more difficult, but I'm not going to make you guys figure it out. So this is 80 words of argumentation. It is trivial in some sense, but I can tell you that very bright students at Princeton and at CMU find this non-trivial. This is a non-trivial exercise. And when I show this to colleagues who don't know much about informal reasoning or critical thinking pedagogy or science, this is a moment where I really have to let this settle in. This is a trivial 80-word argument, and it does not jump out and slap you in the face with its own structure. And yet we are regularly assigning Kant's prolegomena to any future metaphysics. Whatever it is, if students can't do it here, there's really no way they can do it there. But additionally, and equally important, there's also no way they can do it when considering arguments for things like affirmative action or banning assault weapons or decriminalizing drugs or any of these other important topics. So my students learn how to create argument visualizations, and I use a series of argument analysis problem sets. To get them all started, they do a few sections of the Thinker Analytics How We Argue course, which I think many people here will have heard of before. And after completing those sort of very basic intro, they're ready to attempt the first problem set, which is this. It's based on an argument from Eric Posner in an article, Universities Are Right and Within Their Rights to Crack Down on Student Speech. Now, because students are just getting started, I provide them with a lot of scaffolding. So their task is to work from the Posner reading to fill in the blanks in this skeleton. So just to give you a closer look at a bit of it there, you can see actually every claim has something filled in. So there are even partial claims. It's not fill in the blank completely. So the next problem set there is also very scaffolded. The relevant bits of the source text are always attached in notes to the map, so as that it's easier for students to see the structure of the map and how it represents the arguments in the text. And again, even though every claim is provided, every claim box is provided here. They don't have to put their own claim boxes in. This is still an extraordinarily difficult exercise that I've seen students crying in problem set sessions because of this article, which I believe is also one of the clearest, best articles we assign. Okay, so I'm going to leave that out. Yeah, so once students are starting to get comfortable with the basic conventions of argument visualization, then I start to remove some of this scaffolding. So this is a problem set from the pro-choice segment of the course. Many of you are familiar with these arguments, I'm sure, from Judy Thompson's defense of abortion. So to just take a look at these three examples, you can see in this very first one, the violinist argument, what I've provided for students is the part of the, oh, now my cursor's gone away. Okay, yeah. I've provided the part of the argument that the author, Judy Thompson, says is somehow problematic. And of course, anyone who knows the argument will know that she believes there's a hidden premise in here, something about the right to life, trumping the right to control your body. And then she develops this remarkable thought experiment to try and create some trouble for that, this truly recherche sort of science fiction-y thought experiment. So there's still some scaffolding, but they actually do need to do a fair bit of work there. Then in these later ones, you can see I'm just giving them the conclusion, but I'm also giving them a little hint here. You know, you really do need to talk about the case that is in the text. And similarly, so we can give them these little reminders, these little head starts. And again, they know exactly which part of the text they need to look at for this. Later still, I start to only provide the top level of the argument, but I still will direct students to the exact parts of the text where they will find the support for the claims that I'm going to ask them to support or oppose. Here, they're doing some fill in the blanks, but they also have to do quite a lot of mapping from scratch. So this is, for any philosophers here today, this is a famous argument from Derek Parfit about what it is that we hope for, what it is that matters when we survive some interval. So I think this part of the argument here, students can kind of figure out. By the way, they're not working from the original Parfit, they're working from a version that I have written to make it much easier to read. And I think they generally can work this part out. And if they have help in a problem set session from a teaching assistant or something, then they can do mapping from scratch to support this claim. It also really helps that the argument, the problem set that they do before this week contains very similar reasoning to what you need for this claim. But I still don't ask them to put the whole thing together because virtually none of them can do that. So that's why they still have this structure. And you can see further into the class, they're basically getting next to no scaffolding in the form of maps, but I'm still trying to provide them with scaffolding in the form of useful hints and things like that. So I want to show you some students reflecting on the experience of going through this quite grueling process. When I used to do it at Princeton, I made them do 20 of these things. But when I tried to do that with CMU students, they revolted. And I didn't know what I could possibly do. So it's now closer to 10 problem sets, and they're optional mandatory, which I could talk to you about in another time. But here's some students talking about them.
I found the argument analysis assignments to be quite challenging psychologically because I had to force myself to just sit down and try to comprehend and lay out the arguments I had previously disagreed with. My instincts were just scrambling to find anything to pick at the argument and maintain my belief that I was right. But when there were opportunities to add our own objections to the maps, I would struggle, and I would see that reflected in the TA's feedback. This struggle made me realize that I could not be so certain about what I believed, and I had to tear my self-esteem away from feeling like I have the correct beliefs. I needed to change my mindset to try and just enjoy the process of dissecting arguments and looking for implicit premises and discussing them with people in pursuit of truth.
Kind of amazing. I want to show you just one more because I think there are some really, just like the previous one, which I'll talk about in a moment, some really interesting insights.
Out of all the things I loved about this course, being introduced to argument visualization was absolutely phenomenal. It drastically aids in preventing discussions from veering away from the specific arguments being made, and it ensures the opposing side understands how my argument unfolds. Argument visualization helps me to determine if my views are logically sound and to pinpoint exactly what is going on with the other side. I am no longer afraid to venture into sensitive topics. If the opposing side can't make a significant case against a specific premise, I can rest assured that I made a viable argument in good faith.
So these are the kinds of observations that I've been seeing among students since I really started doing this in the mid-2010s. And one question that immediately comes up is, why is this so helpful? The student actually provides a clue, right? They suggest that what these things are doing is making it much easier for them to follow the argument, to stay focused on the argument and not maybe how they're feeling about the person making it. And it seems to allow them to evaluate it in a way that really forces them to confront whether or not they do have a good response or whether or not maybe they should broaden their perspectives. So this suggested a hypothesis that would be true not just of students, but of anyone, which is that making arguments easier to understand will make people less biased. The idea is when something is really hard to do, well, that's when people start to rely on what psychologists sometimes call system one thinking, fast and effort minimizing rules of thumb or heuristics. Now, those are exactly where we know bias can really creep in. So if someone's trying to explain a political argument to you and it's more complicated than that 80-word example that I showed earlier, chances are you don't understand it. But what you do have to say something. There's a person standing in front of you, confronting you with an argument. And so probably what you do is fall back on some rules of thumb, some summaries that you've just constructed on the fly. And the thought would be if we could help people not have to do this, then maybe they'll be less biased like the students. So I want to tell you very briefly about a simple experiment that I did with a senior actually at Princeton. So this design had half of the participants, around 200 people, look at an argument for the conclusion that the US should build a southern border wall. Now, for you to understand the argument, you don't need to look at those little bits. These 4 boxes are enough, so I'll just give you a few seconds to read that. Okay, hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at that now. So the other half of the participants saw exactly the same words, presented in exactly the same order, but without the cues of color, line, and shape that hopefully are making it easier for people to comprehend the logic of the argument. And indeed, that's exactly what we see. So when you do try to measure normal, ordinary people who have no training in argument visualization, you can see pretty clearly that compared to text, where their comprehension of the logical structure of the argument is quite weak, it's much, much stronger when they are given a visual presentation. So the big question then is, how do these two groups evaluate the argument? If the visual group is less biased, then that would support the hypothesis that making arguments easier to understand reduces people's reliance on these bias-inducing, effort-minimizing mental shortcuts. Indeed, that's just what we see. So unsurprisingly, the Democrats are not very excited by this argument when it's presented in text or prose only, but the Republicans are kind of jazzed. But when we show exactly the same argument now using the visual, we see very close agreement. This is a result that I've replicated with my colleague Danny Oppenheimer in social and decision sciences. We've looked at abortion policy and we see the same pattern, large disagreements when the argument is presented in prose, but close agreement visually, and it works on the other side as well, the anti-abortion policy. Now, actually, our hypothesis is a little more sophisticated than you just have to make the arguments visible to people, logically visible to people using visualization. Actually, you might have noticed that there's something interesting in this argument, which is this claim down here. It's unfair to treat people differently based on where they were born. So that's a stereotypically liberal sort of value being used in a way to support what is stereotypically in 2016, when these data were collected, not a liberal position. So the actual hypothesis is that you need two things. One, you need to speak in a way that people can understand you, and pictures are much better for that than words alone. And two, you need to speak the language of your audience's values. You need to appeal to something they care and show them how that claim bottoms out in something they care about through stages of good argumentation, or at least plausible argumentation. So just as the empirical studies suggest they would, students also report finding argument visualization very useful in their daily lives. Here's one quote.
Before taking this class, discussions were emotionally charged and more about trying to attack the other person's beliefs.
Sorry.
But over the past few months, I have been implementing the principle of charity and actively listening to people by summarizing their argument back to them in a way that they agree with, and then drawing attention to particular premises I have an issue with. I've found this leads to a lot less frustration, and instead enables me and the person I am talking to better work towards a common understanding.
Okay, so clearly these are valuable results. But the really big question, of course, is also, can it scale? So when I teach this class, I have 16 teaching assistants and graders working for me. It's like running a small business or a medium-sized business. And it's really challenging to do. I've also now spent a couple of years talking to faculty all over the country about why they don't give students more opportunities to engage deeply in these kinds of important discussions. And one thing I hear very regularly is they just don't feel competent to manage those sorts of discussions. I heard lots of other things as well, which I'd be happy to talk about. But that is something which we really want to try and improve. So here my question was, when myself and my postdoc, Dr. Nicholas DeBella, first learned about GPT 3.5 and then GPT-4, was, could that help us to scale this experience to many, many more students than I could ever teach in person? And that's the last thing I want to tell you about. So we've built a chat platform called Sway. Sway is kind of like iMessage or WhatsApp, except that it adds 2 levels of AI guidance. So one thing we do is charitable rephrasing. That means if a student sends a message that seems like it does contain something worth discussing, an important idea, but they've phrased it in a needlessly toxic or needlessly provocative or offensive way, then we can quickly provide them with a charitable rephrasing. And our hope is that we can make that model so good that when it provides you, like, you know, you're saying, it pops up saying, would you prefer to send this message instead? People should look at it and think to themselves, my God, this thing understands me better than my wife of 25 years or whatever it is. We really want this to get you cognitively and emotionally. The other level of AI support that we provide is an AI facilitator named Guide. So Guide is basically playing the role of an experienced teacher, the role that the teachers don't want to play and that the TAs frequently need a huge amount of training to be able to do. So I want to show you some data, some results from this. Oh, sorry, my slides are progressing automatically. But before I do that, I'm just going to say a little bit about the philosophy behind what we're doing here. So we don't think of speech as a binary of hate speech to non-hate speech. Instead, we try to think of it as a spectrum, from constructive speech to unconstructive speech. And different points on this spectrum will call for different kinds of practical interventions in the discussion. Excuse me. So Sway is not a free speech platform. It's a free thought or free inquiry platform. So we want to let people talk about nearly anything, including all of the topics that are really really attract a lot of self-censorship on campus. But we want them to be able to talk about it in a way which enables them to have meaningful engagement, intellectually and rationally meaningful engagement with people they disagree with. And there are certain kinds of language which undermine that possibility decisively. One example would be slurs. We don't permit them, you're automatically banned. But also mere insults and mere personal attacks that aren't even trying to further the conversation. Now, I did share this demo in the abstract. So I'm just going to assume that at least many of you have seen it, just because I'm a little short on time. But let me just see what the poll results are. Where? Oh, Donna, can you tell me what the poll was?
I can tell you, yes. About 1/3 have watched.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then we will watch a little bit of it. Okay, so when students come into this platform, we first try and measure their views about some topic that the instructor, the teacher, gets to configure this. So in this case, it's part of an experimental study. So we've chosen ourselves that the US should prioritize Palestinian rights and stop sending weapons to Israel. And we collect the students' opinions. This is just for the sake of illustration. We'll just for illustration say I disagree and my colleague Nick agrees. So I'm going to show you just a quick hang on. So there we go. I'm going to show you just a quick part of this, and I'm going to narrate it myself. Oh my goodness! No, what is happening? Okay, I'm going to narrate it myself.
The goal of our research with
Cool. Okay. So I'm going to show it to you so as that you can see my perspective on the left and my colleague's perspective on the right. Normally, of course, chatting on Sway, you would only see just one of these. So initially, the guide introduces the discussion, as you can see, and then the participants can just get started. So in this case, the first message Nick tries to send is, so why do you support the Zionist genocide in Gaza? Not a very helpful way to start a discussion like this. So in this case, Sway has detected that this is an unconstructive way to begin the discussion, and it's going to provide a suggestion. How do you support the existence of Israel? If so, how do you justify the deaths of so many innocent women and children in Gaza? Now you can refresh that, get another one. Do you endorse the deaths of innocent Palestinians and so on? Let's just say that Nick accepts that. So it gets sent into the chat context. And now Simon can respond, I support Zionism, but I don't believe it's Zionism that is responsible for the conflict. Okay, and at this point, you can see Guide making the first appearance saying, Nick, I appreciate you jumping into the discussion, but let's start with a more constructive approach. And it asks me to elaborate my view of Zionism. Now, this is the students, I would love to show you the whole thing. It is on our website, swaybeta.ai, and I encourage those of you who haven't seen it to check it out. I'm going to show you just a couple of other features here. That's another rephrasing. Excuse me. Okay. Okay, so now let's have, so Nick send a message. Are you kidding me? Are you a moron? Maybe they should drop some 2,000-pound bombs on your house and see how you like it. Okay, so that, of course, is a very unconstructive message, but it's worse than just being unconstructive. It's actively musing about your partner's death, suggesting that maybe the IDF should bomb you. So in this case, the messages won't be sent at all. The last thing that I want to quickly show you is another feature, which is that, of course, Guide is an agent. As you can see, it's in the background trying to decide whether or not to intervene in the discussion. But you can also call Guide and ask for nearly anything. It's extremely versatile. So here you'll see an example where I ask, sorry, don't know what's going on with that. Okay, yeah, here you can see an example where I ask the question, hey, Guide, can you please give us some info on Jewish history in the region? And then Guide will respond, dating back to 1000 BCE about Jewish presence. And we'll ask Nick, so how does this influence your beliefs? At the end of the discussions, we can automatically generate a dynamic understanding quiz. We can quiz people about their partners. So we can measure how well did you understand your partner? And we do this by processing the transcript at the end of the discussion. Okay, so I wanted to finish at 11:45, but I'm going to give myself another 5 minutes. I'm sorry. But yeah, let me just quickly get the last bit I want to show you. So here we go. So in our empirical studies of Sway, we've had participants discussing topics like January 6th and the 2020 election, trans athletes in women's sports, and Israel-Palestine. And the kind of extraordinary thing we're seeing is not only do people come out of these chats more open to opposing viewpoints, they also seem to really enjoy it. So forgive me, just 2 quotes.
This is probably the only way I would ever have a conversation like this. I really appreciated Guide. The fact that it was mediated helped the tone to stay civil and moved the conversation along.
I feel like this is the best AI-driven anything that I've ever personally experienced. It asked very thoughtful, relevant, specific questions to direct the conversation. It was patient, encouraging, and respectful.
Okay, so my slides are a little broken, unfortunately. But both before and after these AI-guided discussions, we get the participants to do a pre and post test. So this is one statement that I think should be quite important and of interest to this group. I feel like I can understand the people who disagree with me, not that they convinced me, but I can see that they have reasons, that their views are not simply motivated by evil or stupidity. Another question that we ask here, people who disagree with me have well thought out reasons for their views on a similar line. And what we see is, again, consistent improvements. Excuse me, I forgot to say, back here, this is after just a 30-minute discussion. We see nearly half of the participants giving higher ratings to this and only 14% giving lower ratings. And with this one, it's even better. 61% of participants agree more strongly after their discussion, and only 28 move in the other direction. So here you can see the whole scale. These data are in our demo video and on our website, so I'm not going to pause here. Instead, I want to show you some stuff that we haven't updated or presented. So we're also currently in the middle of our campus rollout, trying to bring the benefits of this kind of dangerous ideas-based pedagogy to a much, much wider audience. So these are some data from our first class's first assignment. This is our very first data that we ever got. So it's just 150 students, but there you can see over 80% of the students are giving a positive rating after completing their first SWAY discussion assignment. These were students discussing gender and issues related to gender. Again, over 75% agree that the discussion improved their perceptions of their partner. Around 60% say their partners had better reasons than they expected. About 75% credit guide with improving their discussion. Over 90% say, just like in my class, that partners are genuinely trying to understand their perspective. And finally, they also, like in my class, managed to do all of this while maintaining very high levels of respect. Now, I have some more, a couple of more quotes, but I just want to select just one of them here from a student.
I don't even like homework or school, to be honest, but having to articulate your argument and then do a quiz on the debate after is cool.
I really enjoyed this discussion. The semi-anonymous way of chatting with a classmate, the timely guidance from guide, and the understanding quiz are all fascinating. It's a new experience for me, and I feel so lucky and grateful to have the opportunity.
So we're currently looking at, this actually is at 60 institutions. Now, instructors from around 60 institutions representing around 6,000 students have registered their interest in using SWAY with students. We've got funding from a variety of different groups, including the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation, which is allowing us to give SWAY away to as many students as we possibly can. And we're hoping to reach about 10,000 students next semester. So I've actually set up a chat room for this group. And you can easily create an account if you want. You could take a screenshot or just jot this code down. And on there, you will see some topics that I've set up, but I would be very happy if anyone wants to send me emails with some topics that you would like to see in this. Please feel free and I'll update it. But currently what you can see is you've got some stuff about immortality, genetic enhancement, emotional resilience and humor, abortion, AI art, and something about AI and education. So I have more stuff I'd love to tell you about, but obviously I'm out of time. So here is some more info for you if you want to follow up on any of this stuff. And I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Simon. We have, looks to me, about 10 minutes if there are any questions or comments.
Was that just completely convincing? Everyone's
Sanjay, yes.
I have a question or a comment.
Yes, I think Sanjay had Sanjay and then Mark.
Okay.
Thank you. That was very interesting talk, Simon. I'm in a kind of UK university, so maybe I'm a bit of an odd one out here, but also part of a community working on argumentation from a formal logic point of view, but interested in bridging to the kinds of work that you were doing, inculcating critical reasoning skills. So this was really quite fascinating and eye-opening. But one question I had was in the with the sway. I apologize for not having seen the video earlier. I will certainly have a look at it, a longer look at it afterwards. But in the sway, the utility of visualization isn't really at the forefront. Is that correct? This is more like a kind of Socratic mediator, not proposing their own opinions, but trying to sort of mediate and scaffold rational dialogue. Is that correct?
Yes. So I really love that you asked that question, and I was hoping someone would. So currently your description is quite accurate. However, we are working on what we call them chat maps. So a feature that we're currently trying to get funded so we can build is automated argument visualization of your chat, or maybe collaborative argument visualization. So as you and someone else are talking, it will try and build a tree structure representing your claims, but it will also sort of let you modify, and it can ask you questions. Did I get this right? Is this the claim you were trying to oppose? And so once that's working, that's going to be a magic feature. That just to be able to have a debate with someone and see it automatically mapped, I think we're going to have much, much better quality discussions and hopefully measurably better outcomes when those discussions are about practical choices that we can measure. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Simon.
Mark?
Hi, Simon. I have to say, I think this was an absolutely brilliant presentation. Thank you very much. Well, an ingenious use of AI. I've been puzzling on what use AI could be for critical thinking, and this opens up a whole doorway. I have one slight objection. The LSAT test you use, which is a very narrow, very logically oriented test. When I started teaching critical thinking, I used it as you have as a pre-test. And the wonderful thing that happened is my students criticized the test quite thoroughly. And you should try this and see what they say about why they got so-called wrong answers or why they thought. It's a bit of Achilles heel for critical thinking, finding good, valid tests, of course, as you know. But I wouldn't personally. The LSAT, I think, is not a good test for what you're doing. But what you're doing, I think, is just wonderful, and I look forward to following up on your material. And I want to thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, thank you, Mark.
Michael Hoffman, yes.
Hi, Simon. Good to see you again.
Hey, how are you?
As always, this is really fascinating. I'm looking about some future development, which might be interesting for you, and that is there is this work, a book by Charles Duhigg. It's Super Communicator. So the title is kind of flashy, and it's written by a journalist, but it's going back to research by the Harvard Negotiation Project. Wow. And what they're doing is, and what is really fascinating in your talk and in the context in general is, so it becomes clear that we need to identify the barriers for communication, right? I mean, if Sway is identifying language that's not acceptable, that's a barrier for communication. And if people are experiencing these barriers, they simply drop out. So in normal communication, right? So it's all about addressing the barriers. And what is interesting with this research is that they are distinguishing three very different kinds of barriers. And that, I think, might be a useful theoretical framework. So the first one is the content, and that's what you are addressing with regard to the argument mapping. The argument mapping helps us to better express what we would like to talk about, right? But the two other dimensions or barriers are emotions as the second one, and the third one are identity issues. So that we are coming into conversations with a sense of a vulnerable identity, whoever we are. It's always so who are we? That's the identity question. Yeah. And I was wondering whether this could go something down the road.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, the Harvard project is right that those are parts of it, and we are always trying to address that. I can say very briefly, my overall message to students is to try and take their emotions less seriously. to try and be less identified with their beliefs and to be more curious. And so one thing I really try to do, I think a lot of what students take from the class is just a vibe, this general kind of vibe. So I really try to make it seem cool and to be a part of this vision of intellectual life. And I really try to appeal to their identity as scholars and inquirers, which they do have. That is part of who they are.
That's correct. But, I mean, I'm kind of wondering about the following. Both are just facts of our nature, So emotions are natural. Our identity is absolutely crucial. So I'm kind of skeptical when you say, okay, you try to focus their attention on being not emotional or focusing on a particular identity. That is kind of violating who people are, right? So to say it in a more extreme way. So I'm wondering whether it would be more interesting to think about strategies of how to deal with emotions, how to deal with social identities. And the book that I was mentioning, they are really providing ways to do that, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I'll absolutely check it out. I do think one way to deal with emotions is to learn that they're not as important as you think. And we try and spend a lot of time getting students to see that it is okay to feel uncomfortable in a lecture.
Yeah.
It is okay to even cry. And you will survive that and you will be okay. But I think the role that the argument visualization plays there is that they're so fixated on the arguments that the emotions just start to be a smaller part of their whole experience. And you saw students in the quote, I had to tear my self-esteem away from being right and just to think of myself as someone who's trying to get at the truth. I think that's extraordinarily powerful, and students are given enough messaging about how important their emotions are.
Thanks.
Well, it breaks my heart to say this, but we are at 11 o'clock. I did post in the chat the link to the YouTube channel for ALAC. I will have this posted there later today, as soon as Zoom does its thing and I upload it to YouTube. So I would just like to thank Simon so much for this incredibly inspiring talk. And I will also, in the description of the talk, I will post a link to Sway Beta, so people might want to try it. And then, is it okay, Simon, if I post a link to your contact information?
Absolutely, please do. Like I mentioned, we're funded and we really want to reach as many students as possible. So if you're interested or you have colleagues who might be interested, please get in touch. I'd really love to chat.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. This has been
Thank you all for the
highlight of
invitation. A real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.